This man was addicted to opium until the day he died and is now a saint in the Catholic Church. Welcome back to God Nod. My name is Casey, and today I'm going to share with you a God Nod from a saint who asked God to be a martyr for him. He asked God to die for the faith, and I'm going to share with you how God answered that prayer. If you are new here, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button if you want more of these videos. This saint is Saint Mark Ji Tianxiang. Now, this guy was born and raised in China, just a good Christian growing up in the 19th century. And this man, he was smart, he was a doctor, and he loved so well. He went out to the poor and he treated people for free. He just loved, right? Well, because of treating people that were ill, he actually got sick himself. And he got treated for it. He got put on opium and his sickness was healed. He was fine. But he ended up becoming addicted to the opium. He realized what he was doing was wrong. He realized he needed to stop taking the opium, but he, no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't. And so he kept going to confession again and again. And he went to the same priest, right? And over a span of years, he just kept going to this priest, confessing his sin of being addicted to this opium and not being able to stop. And finally, the priest told him to stop receiving the sacraments because he didn't think he was serious about his sin because he couldn't stop. Well, back then, they didn't know that drug addiction was a disease as it is, and so there was just a misunderstanding of the whole thing, right? And so this guy listened to the priest, and he didn't receive the sacraments for over 30 years. But he kept going to church, he kept going to Mass, and sitting in that pew and worshiping God with all he had, without receiving the Eucharist, without receiving confession, because he couldn't stop his addiction. He knew the Father loved him. He knew the church loved him. And he was so in love with the Father. But no matter what he did, he could not stay sober. He always went back to the opium. And so these 30 years of not being able to receive the sacraments, he prayed and asked God to die a martyr because he thought that was the only way that he could be saved, that was the only way that he could enter heaven and in eternal life with God, because he could not get over this addiction. And then in 1900, the Boxer rebels turned on the Christians and they captured him and his 9 family members and they put him in prison. And while in prison, all of the community, all of the people that he knew around him, they viewed him as so weak, and they thought he was the first one to go to deny the Lord, to get out of prison, right? Because he still couldn't go a day without opium. He had the opium with him in the prison. He was still taking it every day. He was still addicted in the midst of being captured for his Christianity. And so everyone around him thought he'd be the first one to go. The first one, because they viewed him as so weak because he couldn't go a day without this opium. However, despite what people thought of him and how people thought of how weak they thought he would not deny the Lord's name whatsoever. He was flooded with grace of perseverance that no matter what torture they threatened him with, no matter what torture they did to him, he would not deny the Lord. And then finally, they dragged all of him and his 9 family members, and they dragged him to execution, and his little grandson is there wondering what is going on, and his grandson looked at his grandpa and he said, "Where are we going?" And he looked at him and he said, "Home." Because he knew in that moment that God was answering his prayer that he has been praying for 30 years. He's been praying for 30 years to die a martyr, and God had finally granted him the grace to die a martyr for the faith. And what is so amazing to me is he had this love, this great love from the very beginning of his life all the way to the end, so that when his family was getting beheaded, he told the people that he wanted to be the last one. He wanted to be the last one that was going to be beheaded because he wanted to stand by each and every one of his family members as they were being beheaded so that none of them had to die alone, so that he would be the last one standing. And then when it finally came to him being the last one left to be beheaded, he started singing and praising and shouting the litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that is how he died. Is that just that, like, crazy? Like, what love, right? Like, God answered his prayer to martyrdom. I love this man's witness of his life so much because it shows us that you don't have to be perfect to be a saint. Like, sometimes we view saints as these, like, perfect people and, like, never sinned, and, you know, we, like, almost idolize them as, like, we're just so far away from them, right? But, like, then you see this man's life who is addicted to drugs almost his entire life and couldn't stop no matter how much he tried, and yet he died a martyr for the faith. From his life and his witness, it makes me think and reflect on my own life. As in, do I have the perseverance to continue to go to confession for years and years on end, knowing that I'm struggling with the same thing that I can't stop doing? Do I have the perseverance to keep asking God for forgiveness and trusting in the Lord's mercy when I feel like such a failure? There's times when I go to confession and I feel like I confess one of the same sins over and over and over again. And then, like, after confession, I'm like, God, I'm so tired of these day ones, of, like, starting over and over and over. Like, I wish I could just have day one and just, like, continue, right? But you know what? I've come to realize we need to accept that we're human. We need to accept that we are so weak and we can't do anything without God's grace. And even if it takes a million day ones, we need to keep going. We need to keep persevering because that's what it's going to take. And St. Mark, he did that. He kept persevering. And so I ask myself, do I have that perseverance to just keep going and asking the Lord's forgiveness, even though I'm just tired of having day one start over and over again? It also makes me think about, like, are we that faithful to God and his church that we will keep going no matter how many times we feel like a failure? Even if we can't receive the sacraments, would we still go if we were denied the sacraments? Do we love God enough to realize that Mass is about him and not about us? Do we love God enough to go and worship him despite what we might be receiving? Do we continue to show up Sunday after Sunday at Mass despite who we have problems within the church with, despite how mad we might be at our priest or how awful the music is? Do we keep going because it's about God? Or do we let those things keep us from worshiping God? Do we love God so much that we would rather die a martyr rather than risk losing eternity with God? Not only would we rather, but would we be willing to pray to God to ask to be a martyr for him? Like, whoa, that's like a bold prayer. Like, who prays that, right? But do we love God enough to wish our life to be anything, to say, God, I want your will, not mine. I want this, but if your will is for me to die a martyr, for me to risk my life, for me to have no friends, for me to never see my family again, for me to do anything that the Lord might be calling me to do, am I willing to do it? Because St. Mark was. Are we so confident in the Father's love and mercy that when our friends or family ask us where we're going, that we can answer home? Do we view this world as our home? Or do we view heaven as our home? Do we try to build up our life here and success and fame and popularity and power or whatever, or money? Or do we try to build up our kingdom in heaven? St. Therese has a quote that says, "The world is thy ship and not thy home." Do we view this world as St. Mark did? Not thy home, but heaven as our home. And do we believe that God can answer our prayers, even if it takes 30 years to answer prayers? Sometimes we think God can answer little prayers here and there. But do we believe that asking big things of God, that God can actually do them? He asked to die a martyr for 30 years, and God answered it. So today, I want to challenge you, all of these things that I just said, to just take reflection on if we view this world as our home, if we would be willing to die a martyr, if we would continue to go to church despite how many things that we think that go wrong or how many people we get mad at church or whatever? Would we persevere to the Father's love? From St. Mark's God Nod, I hope and I pray that it gives you something to pray and reflect on, that it inspires you to live your life boldly for the Lord, and that it helps you to see this world as thy ship and not thy home.